"Are you lost too, mister?" asked the little girl to Lonely Vampire King at the airport, what he did. The airport was quiet, almost too quiet. Rain streaked the wide glass windows, making the neon signs outside shimmer like broken jewels on wet stone. A cold wind whispered through the drafty halls, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and distant coffee. Travelers moved in slow, tired lines, but most of the gates were empty. Somewhere, a distant announcement echoed, dull and hollow. In the corner of the terminal, a man sat alone. He did not belong to this place, and yet he lingered, as if drawn by some invisible tether. His dark coat hung loosely over his broad shoulders, and his eyes, sharp, pale, and impossible, watched the shadows dance on the polished floor. He moved with an elegance that was almost unnatural, every motion deliberate, calm, and measured. Even in the midst of modern bustle, he seemed centuries older, a relic from another world. He did not notice the little girl at first. She appeared almost as a flicker of light at the edge of his vision. Tiny, curious, with hair like sunlight and eyes too knowing for her age. She stepped carefully, small shoes tapping softly against the floor, and stopped a few feet away. "Are you lost too, mister?" she asked, her voice light but carrying a strange certainty. The man's head tilted slightly, studying her. Most would have ignored such a question, dismissing it as childish curiosity. But something in her tone made him pause. There was no fear in her eyes. No trembling, just recognition, as if she could see not just him, but the centuries he carried in his bones. "I do not think I am lost," he said finally, his voice low and smooth like a shadow moving through a dark forest. Yet there was a tremor beneath his words, a trace of loneliness he had tried long ago to bury. The girl smiled faintly, tilting her head. "You look lost," she said simply, "even if you don't know it yourself." The words struck him like a cold wind through an open grave. He had wandered through kingdoms and cities, through castles of stone and towers of mist, and had never met anyone who could see the truth behind the mask he wore. She was small, fragile, but there was power in her gaze, something he could not name, something alive. He stood slowly, the faintest shadow of a smile curling his lips. "Perhaps," he admitted, "perhaps I am." She took another step, closer, her small hand clutching a worn teddy bear. "Then maybe we can be lost together," she suggested. "At least until someone finds us." He chuckled softly, a sound that had not been heard in centuries. The noise seemed foreign in this sterile terminal. He knelt down so that his pale face was level with hers, careful not to startle her. "You are brave," he said, his voice a soft echo in the empty space. "Most would run from someone like me." "I'm not most," she replied simply. And she was not. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The rain outside tapped steadily against the glass, and the neon lights flickered in rhythm with their silence. He felt something long buried begin to stir, a warmth that had nothing to do with sunlight or fire. Curiosity, maybe even hope. But the world had a way of reminding him that nothing lasted. From the corner of his vision, he noticed a shadow shifting unnaturally. It lingered at the edge of the terminal, moving with purpose, watching him. He stiffened, every muscle tense, the centuries of learned caution flowing back into him like a cold tide. "Do you see it too?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the shadow. The girl's eyes narrowed. "See what?" He shook his head slowly. "Never mind." She studied him for a moment, her brow furrowed, sensing his hesitation. "You're scared," she said softly. "But not of me." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time in centuries, he did not feel entirely alone. But he could not forget the shadow that lingered, the reminder of enemies, curses, and mistakes that had haunted him for lifetimes. "I should go," he said finally, standing tall, his coat falling around him like dark wings. "You should not be here." "I can follow," she said without hesitation. "I can help. I know things. I can see." He wanted to refuse. He wanted to push her away, to disappear into the night and leave the loneliness behind. But something in her gaze, the fearless, unwavering honesty, made him pause. She was not afraid of him. And perhaps, he realized, he had forgotten what it meant to be seen, truly seen. A sudden announcement echoed through the terminal, jarring in its normalcy. "Attention passengers, gate changes, delays." But his mind was elsewhere. Centuries of exile and solitude weighed heavily on him. Yet he found himself wondering how a small child could pierce such a wall of despair. "Why are you here?" he asked finally. "To make sure you're not alone," she said simply, as if that explained everything. He felt a strange tug in his chest. Protectiveness? Affection? He did not know. He had wandered through the world for hundreds of years, seen kingdoms rise and fall, loved and lost, cursed and betrayed, and yet he had never felt such a pull towards someone so small, so fragile, and yet so unafraid. The shadow in the corner moved again, faster this time, almost imperceptibly. He felt the centuries of instinct return, the predator, the warrior, the king. He could not allow danger near her. Not her. He knelt once more, looking directly into her wide, trusting eyes. "You must stay close," he warned softly. "Do not let anyone, anything, take you from here." "I won't," she promised, gripping his coat lightly, her small fingers almost laughing against the dark fabric. Then, without warning, the shadow shifted fully into view. It was not human. Its form twisted and unnatural, a whisper of darkness that seemed almost alive. It glided silently toward them, the air around it cold and heavy. The little girl's hand tightened around his coat, but she did not scream. She only looked up at him, waiting. He rose slowly, placing himself between her and the approaching shadow. The terminal lights flickered as if recognizing the presence of something ancient and dangerous. Every instinct, every memory of betrayal and battle, flared in him. He could not allow this creature to reach her, not while he still drew breath. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice low, resonant, like the echo of 1,000 forgotten halls. The shadow hesitated, sensing something in him it had not expected. Power. Authority. Something older than time itself. And yet, It did not retreat. The little girl watched silently, holding her teddy bear, her wide eyes unwavering. "It's not fair," she whispered. "You shouldn't have to fight alone." He looked down at her, the tiniest smile touching his lips. "No one fights alone," he said. "Not truly." And for a brief moment, the rain outside seemed to pause, the airport silent except for the faint hum of neon lights. Two lost souls, one ancient, one innocent, stood together against a darkness older than either of them. The shadow advanced again, slower this time, deliberate, its intentions unclear. He tightened his grip on the little girl's hand, feeling the warmth of her small, human pulse against the chill of his centuries-old blood. "You are brave," he murmured, almost to himself. "Braver than you should be." She only smiled. "So are you, mister," she said softly. "Even if you don't know it." The shadow lurked at the edge of their vision, circling, patient. And though the airport remained eerily quiet, the weight of centuries, of curses and lost love, pressed heavily on the man. For the first time in hundreds of years, he felt something he had thought impossible: fear. Not for himself, but for her. The little girl squeezed his hand again, and he realized he had no choice. He could not leave. Not now. Not ever. A distant rumble of thunder shook the terminal, echoing like the heartbeat of some sleeping god. The shadow moved closer, a whisper of darkness against the polished floor, and he knew that whatever this night held, it was only the beginning. He glanced down at the little girl, her gaze unwavering, and whispered, "Stay close." And as the shadow drew near, the king realized something that had long been forgotten in his lonely heart. Perhaps being lost was not always a curse. Perhaps it was only the first step toward finding something worth holding on to. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, the neon lights flickered. And in the quiet, haunted terminal, two unlikely companions prepared to face a darkness that neither fully understood. The air grew heavy, and the shadow surged forward with sudden intent, a silent promise of danger. The Vampire King's hand tightened on the girl's, his eyes blazing with centuries of power and newfound determination. The storm outside raged, and the night had only just begun. The rain had not stopped. Outside the terminal, puddles reflected the neon glow of distant billboards, twisted and fragmented, like a broken mirror of the world. The Vampire King and the little girl stepped carefully through the wet night, the air heavy with the scent of storm and earth. He held her hand firmly, his long coat trailing behind him, each step measured, silent, and purposeful. "You shouldn't be out here," he murmured, his pale eyes scanning the deserted streets. There was an intensity in his gaze, a predator's vigilance that had grown over centuries. "Danger waits in every shadow." "I'm not scared," she replied quietly, tugging gently at his coat. "I can help." He shook his head slowly. "No. You are too small, too human. There are things you do not understand." She looked up at him, unwavering. "Then, teach me." His chest tightened. He had not heard such honesty, such fearless insistence in hundreds of years. And yet, it was dangerous. Innocence, when exposed to his world of curses, enemies, and dark power, could be fragile, easily broken. As they moved further from the airport, The shadows shifted. Figures lurked at the edges of his perception. Watchers, hunters, echoes of the past that had never fully released him. The Vampire King's senses sharpened. Every instinct screamed. The night was not empty. They were not alone. The sound of rain muffled by the tall buildings around them. The girl looked up, puzzled. "What is it?" she asked. "The city itself is alive with eyes," he said softly. "It watches. It remembers. And it never forgets." From the darkness, a figure emerged. Not human. Its form was shadow and mist, flickering and indistinct, but the sense of malice it carried was unmistakable. The Vampire King's hand clenched around hers, his grip firm, protective. "Stay behind me," he warned, his voice low and commanding. The shadow paused, almost curious. It had followed him through centuries, across lands and realms, and now it hovered here, at the edge of the human world, drawn by something it could not name. The little girl, clutching her teddy bear, whispered, "I am not afraid." His gaze softened. "Just for a moment. You should be," he said, though there was a hint of admiration in his tone. "Fear keeps you alive." She looked at him, her wide eyes bright with understanding. "Then I will be afraid."
Only enough.
He allowed himself a quiet, fleeting smile, but there was no time to linger. The shadow surged forward, swift as a wind that carried the chill of forgotten tombs. He moved faster than the eye could follow, placing himself between the creature and the girl. The streets seemed to bend around him, the rain blurring the world like a painting half finished. His power, ancient and formidable, radiated outward. Shadows recoiled, whispers of fear spreading through the night. The figure paused, hissing softly, as if recognizing an opponent that could not be easily defeated. "Do you have to fight?" the girl asked, her small voice calm but tense. He looked down at her, the weight of centuries pressing upon him. "I have no choice," he admitted. "Some things cannot be ignored." The shadow writhed, stretching and twisting, forming shapes that should not exist. Memories flashed through him. Long ago, he had faced creatures like this, creatures born of betrayal, curses, and broken promises. He had survived, but only by making sacrifices he still mourned. The little girl tugged gently at his hand. "I'll stay close," she said. "We can do it together." For a brief moment he considered refusing her help, sending her away, protecting her from the dangers that had defined his life. But as he looked into her fearless eyes, he realized something that had been lost for centuries. Hope. Not the fragile human hope that could break easily, but a quiet, unyielding light that refused to bend even under the heaviest weight of darkness. He nodded once, silently acknowledging her courage. Then, as one, they moved forward. The shadow lunged. He acted instinctively, a blur of motion. Hands moved faster than thought, striking with precision born of centuries of practice. The creature hissed and recoiled, but it was relentless, circling, waiting for a moment of weakness. "You are not like the others," it whispered, a voice like broken glass. "You carry centuries of guilt, of love, lost and betrayed." And yet you are not alone. I do not answer to you, he said, voice like a storm breaking. Not any more. The shadow paused, almost contemplative, then dissipated like smoke in the wind, leaving behind only a lingering chill. He breathed deeply, feeling the old power within him settle like embers in a long-forgotten hearth. The little girl clung to his hand, her small frame shivering, not from fear, but from the cold that followed the creature's passing. He bent down, wrapping his coat around her shoulders, his pale fingers brushing her hair back gently. "You are remarkable," he said, softly. "Few could have faced that and remained whole." She looked up at him, a faint smile forming on her lips. "I'm not remarkable. Just brave." He studied her, feeling something unfamiliar, admiration mingled with protectiveness, and, for the first time in centuries, warmth. She reminded him of what he had once fought for. Not kingdoms, not power, but something far more fragile, far more precious. Trust, innocence, and the possibility of love without fear. They walked on in silence, the rain slowing to a drizzle. The city around them seemed to settle, the shadows receding into corners and cracks. But the sense of unease lingered. He could feel it, a pulse beneath the world, a reminder that his enemies were patient, and that the past was never far behind. "Who are you, really?" the girl asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. He hesitated, not from secrecy, but from the weight of truth. How could he explain centuries of exile, betrayal, and sorrow to someone so young? How could he reveal a heart that had been hardened by loss, yet softened by this tiny human presence? "I am someone who has wandered far," he said finally. "Someone who has lost much and learned too little." She considered this, tilting her head thoughtfully. "Then maybe it's time to learn more," she said. "I can help." The corners of his lips twitched in a ghost of a smile. "Perhaps you can," he admitted, though the thought unsettled him more than he wished to reveal. They reached a small deserted park, its benches slick with rain and its fountains quiet. The world seemed to pause around them, as if holding its breath. He allowed her to sit on a bench, her small feet dangling while he stood nearby, vigilant. "You don't have to be alone," she said quietly, watching him, as if she could see straight into his soul. He turned away, staring into the darkened horizon, his thoughts heavy. Loneliness had been his companion for centuries, and yet here was someone who refused to let him remain buried in it. He felt the stirrings of a bond he had long forgotten, the fragile, trembling beginnings of trust and perhaps hope. From the edge of the park, a movement caught his attention. Slow, deliberate, and menacing. Different from the first, yet carrying the same sense of intent, the same hunger for him. He stiffened, the years of exile and caution flooding back in an instant. "We are being watched," he whispered. The girl's small hand found his again. "Then we stay together," she said, her voice calm and steady. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. She was small, fragile, human, and yet she had touched something in him that no one had for centuries. He would not let her fall, not to the shadows, not to the darkness, not to the mistakes of his past. The figure in the distance advanced, its movements swift, silent, and purposeful. He felt the cold brush of its presence against the edge of perception, a promise of danger that could not be ignored. "Stay close," he said, gripping her hand tightly. "Whatever comes, do not let go." The girl squeezed his hand, her small fingers firm. "I won't," she said simply. And in the quiet, rain-slicked park, two unlikely companions faced a threat older than either of them. The night was far from over, and the shadows that followed them were patient. They would wait, strike, and test the bond that had begun to form. The Vampire King felt the stirrings of fear, not for himself, but for her. And for the first time in centuries, he realized that the true fight was not against enemies outside, but against the walls he had built within. A distant rumble of thunder echoed across the city, as if the storm itself were warning them. And as the shadow drew closer, the king and the girl prepared for a night that would change everything, forever. The city streets were quieter now, almost eerily so. Rain had ceased, leaving the world slick and reflective, mirrors of a night that seemed endless. The Vampire King moved with the little girl at his side, her small hand still firmly in his. Though the storm had passed, a heavier darkness lingered, one that no sun could chase away. "The shadows are growing stronger," he whispered, more to himself than to her. His eyes, pale and sharp as ice, scanned every alley and doorway. Centuries of caution surged through him, instincts honed to perfection. They do not forget. They never forgive, and they never tire of hunting what they want. The girl looked up at him, a frown knitting her small brow. "Then why do they follow you?" He stopped, kneeling slightly so that he could meet her gaze. The neon reflections from the puddles shimmered across his sharp features, giving him an almost ethereal glow. "Because I have been hunted my entire life," he said softly, voice like wind brushing across ancient stone. "By those I wronged, by those I failed, and by those I could not save." Her eyes widened, innocence mingled with understanding. "But you're not alone now," she said quietly. "I'm with you." For a moment, he wanted to believe it. The warmth of her trust was like sunlight breaking through centuries of winter. But he knew better. The shadows would not stop. They had always found him, no matter where he fled. Their path led them to a place long abandoned, a cathedral at the edge of the city. Its towering spires were cracked and worn, its once grand doors hanging loosely on rusted hinges. The air smelled of damp stone and memories, of power and sorrow that lingered long after the prayers had stopped. "This place," the girl whispered, awe in her voice, "it feels alive." He nodded, eyes scanning every corner. "It remembers," he said. "This cathedral has seen centuries of devotion and betrayal. Places like this carry the echoes of the past." They moved inside cautiously. Moonlight filtered through shattered stained glass, casting colorful, fractured patterns across the cold stone floor. Dust hung in the air, and every step they took echoed like a distant heartbeat. The shadow waited. It appeared at the far end of the cathedral, coalescing into a form more defined than before. Its shape was twisted and grotesque, yet unmistakably intelligent. Eyes like voids stared at him, hungry, patient. The creature had been watching him since the airport. And now it was here, in the cathedral, where the walls remembered every betrayal he had endured. "You are here," the king said, voice steady but laced with centuries of power. "And I will not flee." The shadow moved closer, the air growing cold and heavy. It hissed, a sound like breaking glass, like whispers of lost souls. "You cannot hide from what you have done," it said. "Your time of reckoning has come." The little girl stepped forward, clutching her teddy bear tightly. "I'm not afraid," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'm with him." He felt a surge of warmth at her words. She was small, fragile, yet unafraid. Courage had a way of breaking through centuries of despair. But even as he felt that warmth, the king knew that the shadow could not be ignored. "You must stay behind me," he said, taking a deep breath. "Whatever happens, do not leave my side." The king moved faster than thought, a blur of motion. Shadows and light danced around him as he struck with precision. Each movement carried centuries of strength, skill, and control. But the shadow was relentless, striking from angles he had not anticipated, moving with a grace and malice that was almost human. The little girl clung to his coat, her wide eyes following every motion. "Be careful," she whispered. He allowed a brief glance at her, a flicker of vulnerability hidden beneath the centuries of armor he had built around himself. "I always am," he said softly, though the words felt hollow even to him. The shadow hissed again, retreating only to strike once more. The cathedral trembled, dust falling from the high ceiling. He realized then that the fight was not only physical. The creature was feeding on his fear, his guilt, the centuries of sorrow that weighed heavily upon him. "You cannot escape," it whispered again. "All you hold dear will be taken." "Not her," he said firmly, voice echoing through the empty cathedral. "Not her." The shadow recoiled slightly, as if surprised by the intensity of his conviction. The little girl's presence had awakened something within him, something long buried beneath centuries of loneliness. For the first time he fought not for survival, but for something far more precious. But even as he gained the upper hand, the creature struck harder. It seemed to know his every move, anticipate his every thought. He realized with a jolt that it was not just a shadow. It was a manifestation of his own past, of all the mistakes, betrayals, and failures he had carried for centuries. Pain flared in his chest, not from the creature's attack, but from the memories it forced upon him. The queen he had lost, the kingdom he had failed, the lives he could not save. Every failure, every regret, every ounce of guilt was drawn into this single, relentless form. The little girl clutched his hand tightly, pulling him back from the edge of despair. "You're not alone," she whispered. "I'm here." Her words pierced through the darkness, through the centuries of pain. He realized then that redemption was not about undoing the past. It was about choosing to act in the present, about protecting what mattered now, even if the past could not be changed. Summoning every ounce of strength, he surged forward, confronting the shadow not as a hunted king, but as a protector, as someone who would not allow innocence to be harmed. The cathedral shook with the force of the confrontation. Light and shadow collided, echoing off the stone walls in a symphony of power and emotion. The little girl stood close, her small hand in his, her eyes fixed on him with trust and courage. She was the anchor he had never known he needed, the reminder that even the darkest of nights could give birth to light. With a final, resolute motion, he expelled the shadow, forcing it back into the corners of the cathedral, into the cracks of memory and forgotten sorrow. It dissipated, leaving only cold air and the faint scent of rain. He fell to one knee, breathing heavily, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. The little girl knelt beside him, her small hand brushing against his cheek. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a child, but a spark of hope, a promise that even he could still be more than his past mistakes. "I will be," he said finally, voice low but steady, "because of you." But even as he spoke, a new realization struck him. The shadow had not been alone. It had been only a fragment of a larger, more powerful force, something that had followed him across centuries, something patient, intelligent, and unforgiving. And then, without warning, a mist rose from the floor of the cathedral. Cold, dense, and unnatural, it curled around the little girl, lifting her gently, as if by invisible hands. She cried out, but her voice was muffled, swallowed by the mist. "No!" he shouted, moving to her, but the mist surged, separating them. The shadows seemed to twist and multiply, forming shapes that danced around him, mocking, taunting. He reached for her, but she was gone, carried into the unknown by the swirling darkness. His heart clenched with a pain he had not felt in centuries. The weight of centuries, of mistakes and failures pressed upon him like a physical force. He had fought, he had protected, and yet in a single moment he had lost her. He sank to the cathedral floor, hands pressed to the cold stone, voice breaking as he whispered her name. "No, stay with me. Don't leave me." The mist lingered, taunting him, and in that moment he realized the truth he had long feared. Redemption was never easy. It demanded sacrifice, courage, and the willingness to face the deepest darkness, not just in the world, but within oneself. Rising slowly, determination hardening his features, he whispered to the shadows, "I will find her, no matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes. You will not take her from me." And as he stepped forward into the swirling mist, the cathedral trembled, echoing with the unspoken promise of a struggle far greater than either of them could yet imagine. The night had grown deeper. The storm was gone, but the darkness remained. And somewhere in the folds of that darkness, the little girl's frightened but unbroken voice called to him, guiding him toward a path of redemption, courage, and a love he had thought lost to centuries. The mist had swallowed the little girl, carrying her into a darkness that felt alive, cold, and endless. The Vampire King stood at the cathedral entrance, rain-slick stone beneath his boots, heart pounding with a fury and fear he had not felt in centuries. His pale eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the last remnants of moonlight, as if the night itself were lending him strength. "Show yourself!" he demanded, his voice carrying through the empty cathedral. "Wherever you hide, I will find her." The mist shifted, swirling unnaturally, and from within it, the shadow emerged. Not the twisted creature from before, but a more terrifying presence. Older, larger, with eyes like black stars, it radiated hunger, malice, and the weight of countless centuries. "You cannot save her," it whispered, voice like a cold wind cutting through stone. "She belongs to me now. And you are too broken, too weak to stop it." The king stepped forward, his coat billowing around him like wings of shadow. "I am not weak," he said, voice steady, "and she does not belong to you. Not to shadows, not to curses, not to the mistakes of my past. She belongs to life, to light, to hope. And I will fight until the last breath in my body to bring her back." The shadow hissed, twisting in rage, and surged forward. The air crackled with power, the cathedral trembling under the weight of their confrontation. Stones fell, dust clouded the air, and yet the king moved with a grace that belied the centuries of exhaustion and sorrow he carried. He dove into the mist, senses sharp, feeling the little girl's pulse like a beacon. She was frightened, yes, but not broken. Her small hand gripped her teddy bear tightly, and somewhere deep inside, he sensed that the child held a power he could not yet name, a light that could pierce darkness itself. "You have grown," he murmured as he reached her side, gently lifting her into his arms. "Braver than anyone I have known." She looked up at him, eyes wide but unwavering. "I knew you would come," she said softly. "Mm. I knew you would not leave me." A rush of emotion surged through him, centuries of loneliness and regret mingling with the fierce protective love he felt for her. She was not just a child to protect. She was the spark of life, the reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there could be hope. The shadow hissed, furious at their bond. "You cannot change what you are," it said. "You are bound by centuries of failure, by blood and curse." "You cannot win." "I am not the same as I was," he said quietly. "I am not the man who ran from my past. I am here. And I fight for her and for me." The mist surged, thickening, coiling around them like a living thing. But the girl did not scream. Instead, she pressed herself against him, and in that simple act, something incredible happened. The mist recoiled, as if recognizing a force it could not overcome. Her innocence, her unbroken courage, was not powerless. It was a shield, a light that the darkness could not consume. He felt it too, a warmth spreading through his chest, a fire he had thought long extinguished. It was hope, yes, but also love. The kind that transcends centuries, that cannot be contained by walls of solitude or regret. Together, he said, gripping her hand tightly, "We are stronger than you know." The shadow shrieked, a sound that tore through the cathedral like a storm, and surged for one final strike. But he was ready. With a sudden motion, he raised his hand, summoning the power that had lain dormant for centuries, the strength of a king, tempered by compassion, sharpened by the promise of redemption. Light flared from his body, pale and luminous, cutting through the darkness. The shadow recoiled, screeching in fury, but the king did not waver. He stepped forward, unrelenting, each motion precise, deliberate, full of centuries of knowledge and skill. The mist swirled violently, but the girl's small hand in his remained steady. Together, their presence formed a shield, a force of life against the void of centuries-old hatred. And slowly, inch by inch, the darkness began to unravel, dissolving into the cold air, leaving only the stillness of the cathedral behind. When the last tendrils of shadow disappeared, the air felt lighter, almost gentle. Dust settled, moonlight returned, and the faint scent of rain filled the room. The little girl looked up at him, smiling faintly, her small chest rising and falling with relief. "You did it," she whispered. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "No," he said softly. "We did it. Together." For the first time in centuries, the king felt not the weight of sorrow, but the lightness of connection, of redemption. His past would always be a part of him. The regrets, the losses, the failures, but they no longer defined him. He had fought, he had saved, and he had learned that even in the deepest darkness, there could be light. Outside, the first rays of dawn began to appear, painting the world in gold and rose. He lifted the little girl in his arms, her small frame warm against him, and stepped out of the cathedral. The city, still wet from the storm, reflected the morning light, sparkling like a promise renewed. "You are safe now," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "And I am no longer alone." She rested her small head against his shoulder, smiling. "I never thought you would be," she said softly. "But you are. You can be." He let the words wash over him, feeling centuries of loneliness and regret dissolve into something new, something stronger, hope, connection, and the courage to move forward. As they walked through the streets, hand in hand, the memories of the shadow faded, replaced by the warmth of their bond. The king knew that the world would always hold dangers, that darkness would always wait. But he also knew that he no longer had to face it alone. Not ever. The little girl looked up at him again, her eyes shining with quiet certainty. "Are you really lost now?" she asked, echoing the words she had spoken the first night. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that had not touched his face in centuries. "Not anymore," he said, voice full of promise. "Not with you." They walked on, the city awakening around them, the rain-streaked streets glimmering with light. Shadows lingered at the edges, but they no longer held power over him. He had faced them, fought them, and emerged stronger. And beside him, the little girl, the spark of hope, walked with unwavering trust. For the first time in centuries, he felt whole. And as the morning sun rose higher, casting long golden rays over the city, he realized that the greatest power was not in crowns, castles, or curses, but in connection, in courage, and in the willingness to love even after endless darkness. Together, they disappeared into the light of day, leaving behind the echoes of shadows and the weight of the past. And though the world was vast, unpredictable, and full of mysteries, they faced it as one, two souls, bound by trust, courage, and the promise of eternal bond. The shadows had fled, and in the golden light of dawn, the vampire king and the little girl found not just safety, but a beginning, an eternal promise of hope, redemption, and love that could endure even centuries of night.